Okay, this question is for Brother Daniel, because you are a Yoruba from Nigeria. Who are the real Israelites?
The real Israelites are essentially the Bantu people who are spread right across West, Central, East, and Southern Africa, and also throughout the diaspora, the United States, Caribbean, and also in South America as well. So we're scattered throughout the four corners of the world. It is our heritage. That's what's, and it really goes back to, you know, some of the topics that we were talking about, the salvation and the role of Israel. The role of Israel, as I stated, was the high priest. They were supposed to take the word to the world. That was the whole purpose of Israel. They were the priests of the Most High. And disenfranchising them from their heritage and their understanding literally severs that connection between knowing who you are and what you're supposed to do, what your role is, and also taking that to the rest of the world. So yes, that's my honest belief. I've done tons of research as well that does show that the original Israel or the original Hebrews were black melanated people.
Okay, Caleb, help me understand, because I'm coming from a place of ignorance as a guy living in Australia with an African background. Who are you guys, African Americans? Are you guys us Africans, or are you guys Israelites, or are we the same people? Help me understand. Who are you, African Americans?
Okay, so I'm going to answer it this way. Maybe redefining some terms, right? So African American, exactly what it sounds like. A person who comes from Africa, who they picked up in Africa, I should say, and they brought to America, who is born in America, lives in America, has an American accent, American way of understanding, African American. Okay, so African, that term, when we think of it, we tend to think of a person who looks like us, and that's just kind of it. The reality of it is, when you look at the continent of Africa in terms of a landmass, it actually includes portions of the Middle East, including Israel.
That's true.
So even a person who is born in the Middle East today technically is an African because they are on the landmass of Africa. So has nothing to do with how you look, has nothing to do with heritage. It's just the landmass to which you were born on. Okay. Israelite is specifically a person, in terms of lineage, specifically a person who is of the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in some kind of way. In general, we recognize that through the father. But if you have, let's say, in the book of Exodus, where you had the man who was of the Israelite mother and the Egyptian father, he was still considered an Israelite because he was in that area. But generally, for legal purposes, the lineage would be through the father. Now, in terms of if you are an Israelite, I don't know, because I haven't done research in Rwanda, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. And I don't know if that's public that you're from.
Yeah, because guys, yes,
Okay.
it is public. Just you know, I barely talk about myself. I'm from a country called Rwanda, and I come here identifying more as a Christian, not my background, but it is nice that people know who I am. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, I haven't done research in that area, so I couldn't tell you exactly. In terms of what I say I'm an Israelite, yes. The reason why I would say I'm an Israelite is because when you look at the people that were brought over, and especially if you look at the history of what was going on in West Africa at that time, you had the Spanish Inquisitions, in which a lot of the Yahudim, the Jews, and these Jews were biblical Israelites that were living in that area, were being kicked out, and they were being sent in mass numbers to various parts of West Africa. At the same time this was happening, the transatlantic slave trade was starting, and it was the exact same country that was both kicking these Jews out and taking people over to the States and to South America in slave ships. The first slaves who were black were Jews. They had never stepped foot in Africa. They were from Portugal. These were the first slaves sent to Jamaica. This is on record. You can look this up. A lot of the Jews that were, and not only that, not only did you have a lot of slaves being, or a lot of Jews being deported to Africa, and they were black, you had various Jewish communities all throughout Africa, in particularly West Africa, South Africa, and Central Africa. They were just all over the place. Black Jews that after the slave trade just disappeared. So before the slave trade, they were all over the place. After the slave trade, they disappeared. They were gone, nowhere to be found. Then you have things like the Igbo. The Igbo, as people know, a large tribe, black. They say they are descendants of Israel. Even modern day Jewish people have said these people are definitely Israelites. They say we are Jew. They do things in Torah just as part of their custom. It's not even religious to them. They're just doing it. 70% of them were the ones that were brought over to the slave trade. 70%. And again, that's just dealing with that part of Africa. There's also well-known fact there were Israelites in East Africa. There were Israelites in North Africa that were black. When you go to a little bit further back in history, after the destruction of Jerusalem, you had a lot of the Israelites who were living there, a lot of the Jews who were living there, who migrated to Saudi Arabia, and they started building up miniature kingdoms there. They were dark-skinned people. They were black. And even some of the people in, I believe it's in Senegal or somewhere in that area, they actually say that they come from those Jews that migrated from Saudi Arabia when the Muslims started to take over. So just looking at a lot of the history and looking at a lot of things like that, you can see the migration of a lot of people from Israel who were claiming to be Israelites or who were Israelites, moving either through Saudi Arabia into Egypt, or in some cases being kidnapped into Europe, because that did happen. They were taken into Europe, being kicked all out of Europe, all different places at all different times, forced into Portugal, Portugal kicking them out, then being forced out of Egypt, forced out of all these places into Africa. And then from Africa being deported into different parts of the Americas and South America, and some of being sent back to Europe in slavery. So there's even people that you can see got shipped over to India and to China and things like that. And for African Americans, this actually can be seen in evidence in some of our cultural things that we do. Again, not knowing where it comes from, we just do it. A perfect example of that is a lot of African Americans, we don't eat rare steaks. We say that we don't like our steaks bloody. We don't eat blood. Well, that's a commandment, right? But most of us have no idea that followed all the way from Africa, all the way through, just no clue. But we don't eat blood. We don't do it. Or again, in West Africa today, as it stands right now, has more circumcised people than any place on earth, including modern day Israel today. Well, we know what circumcision is. It's a sign of the covenant. So, yeah, that's why I would say I'm an Israelite. That would be the evidence I would give for that. Again, if you're just asking me, are you a bloodline Israelite? I haven't done research in that area, so I couldn't tell you specifically. But we could talk about, a person who's not an Israelite and how that can factor in and things like that a little later.
Interesting. So all I hear you blaming us Africans for selling you guys into slavery.
No. So I'm not going to say I'm blaming Africans, because at the end of the day, slavery happened because, just like it did in the scripture, because the Israelites were not keeping the commandments, right? The Most High is the one who brings anybody who sells it, even back like when you mentioned Judges. Every time it says that those countries took over, it doesn't say that, oh, the Philistines came. It says, and Yahuwah brought the Philistines, right? So when Babylon came, Nebuchadnezzar, it literally says, Yahuwah says, I'm bringing Nebuchadnezzar in here to do this, right? When the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, both the Romans and the Jews wrote about and saw how they literally saw a light shining from the temple, and they all heard, let us depart. And they all heard a whoosh out of the temple. And even when the Romans said, well, how are you able to take over Jerusalem? The Romans answered and said, because their God left them. So
Okay.
I don't blame Africans. I blame us for not keeping the commandments, and you all were just the tool that. And I say you, I don't mean you all like you guys, but you all were